So here's another comparison between developed countries and developing countries. So here we have developing and developed. If you look at GNP, gross national product, per individual, you can see that per individual per year is making about 175 in developing countries on average, and then developed countries it's about 35,000. Check out life expectancy. Come down here to female literacy, right? Huge factor when it comes to fertility rates. More educated your females are, the lower the fertility rate will be. Birth rates, see these numbers here up in the upper corner? They correspond to different factors down below. Economic development is improving living standards throughout growth. Most developed countries have high industrializations and high per capita income. Developing countries have moderate to low income, and they represent about 97% of the projected increase in the world population. Developed countries have a higher standard of living, including a longer life expectancy, decreased infant mortality, greater food production than food needs, decreased air and water pollution, and decrease in poverty overall. While developing countries, poverty produces harmful environmental effects. Soil, water, and forests are depleted. Pollution levels are high. Infant mortality rate is 8 times higher than in developed countries, and wages are low with poor working conditions as the norm. So what's keeping us alive? Well, it's this natural capital that our Earth has that sustains us. And we have different resources, and through those resources we produce different services. But how are we going to sustain this? Well, one concept is looking at living on interest versus living on principle. Now, if you live on interest, imagine you win the lottery and you get $1 million. Here we go. And you invest the $1 million, your capital, your principal, and you get 10% interest. So you will have sustainable income of $100,000 per year without depleting your $1 million. While living on principal, if you actually use $200,000 per year of your $1 million, it'll be gone after 5 years. If you spend $110 million per year, then you would be bankrupt early in the 10th year. So which one would you prefer, living on interest or principal? Now we have to think about this in the environment. If we live on interest, we have to sustain what we have to make sure that we keep our principal, what we have, all our resources, because there are a limited amount of resources. Or do we live on principle, where we consume what we can until it runs out? So once again, looking back at our trade-offs of economic development. Now, because of the development, yes, there are some good news and bad news. Global life expectancy has doubled since 1950. Infant mortality cut in half since 1955. Food production ahead of population growth since 1978, so we're producing more food than we're consuming. Air and water pollution down in most developed countries, and number of people living in poverty has dropped 6% since 1990. But there is some bad news with that. Life expectancy 11 years less in developing countries than in developed countries. Infant mortality rate in developing countries 8 times higher than that in developed countries. Harmful environmental effects of agriculture may limit future food production. Air and water pollution levels in most developed countries are too high, and half of the world's people are trying to live on less than $3 a day. I mean, imagine that, $3 a day. How much money do you think that you spend in a day? I mean, you have to consider all the travel, the gas consumed in that travel, your food that you eat at lunch, breakfast, and dinner, and then the products that you use. I mean, that pencil wasn't free. Now, you are living in a global society. Globalization leads to a world socially, economically, and environmentally more interconnected. Technology, international trade, and human mobility allows for people to interact with others. Environmentally sustainable development rewards sustainable activities and discourages harmful activities. And there's some questions that goes along with globalization. Where were your shoes made? And why do you think that's a concern? Where is your computer made? Maybe thinking about your smartphone, many of you having Apple products. Where does your food come from? What do you think would happen if we stopped buying Chinese products? What do you think would happen to China's economy? And how do you think that would impact the United States? How does a global economy impact cultural diversity? We will be discussing these questions in class, so please make sure you have your answers ready. So here we're looking at resources. And natural resources are those that are in the environment or obtained from the environment. Some examples like food, water, air, shelter, petroleum are different kinds. Now if you look over here, follow the arrow over, first one we're going to talk about is non-renewable. Non-renewable means that there's only a finite amount, and once we use them, that's it, they're done. So some examples looking at fossil fuels, different types of metals, and then non-metallic minerals. Perpetual resources are ones that are constantly renewed or always available, looking at direct solar energy, wind, tide, and different types of motions or energy there. Now, renewable ones are important, and the thing you have to remember with these is you cannot use them faster than they can be replenished, because if you do, then they become non-renewable. Some examples here: fresh water, fresh air, fertile soil, plants and animals. Now, if you are to remove these resources or deplete them, it's known as environmental degradation, where you degrade the area of what used to be. So here we're going to take a closer look at non-renewable resources. Energy resources that are non-renewable, looking at fossil fuels, metallic resources like copper, iron, aluminum, and non-metallic examples like sand, clay, phosphates, different types of stuff. So looking over here at this graph, we can look at resource production, which means that we're extracting it and turning it into something. Over time, it escalates and then increases, and then it hits almost this capacity, and then it starts to drop off. Now you can have the physical depleted, where we've consumed too much, and then you can also have the economic depleted, where it just becomes too expensive to get. And some solutions to prevent environmental degradation of our non-renewable resources is to recycle, reuse, conserve. So one of the big topics in environmental science is pollution. And also one of the largest portions of the AP environmental exam comes from different types of pollutants. So pollution or pollutants are chemicals that are in high enough quantities that can cause harm to people or other living organisms. So where do they come from? Well, certain pollutants can enter naturally, or others can be human-induced with human activities, such as burning coal to release different sulfurs to cause sulfuric acid that causes acid rain. Or going back to the natural one, looking at volcano eruptions. Now there are two different types of sources with pollution, point source and non-point source, but we'll get into that more in later chapters. Now, different types of effects of pollution: they can disrupt or degrade life, damage human health, wildlife, or property, and they can produce a nuisance in noise, smells, tastes, and sights, ones you might not think of.